they have learned from that. So I'll hand over to you, Aisling. Thanks very much.
Thanks a million, Nuala, and thank you for the invite to present this evening. Yes, I chose the title of this specifically because my experience of teaching over many, many years is that I learn from teaching and from students all the time. So that's the premise on which this was begun. And this is exemplified or captured very nicely by Joseph Joubert's, a French essayist, when he wrote, "To teach is to learn twice." And I really do believe that I'm learning all the time through my teaching. So I'm going to give an overview of how I got involved in this whole area, the timelines around that, how I developed and brought about the delivery of the dedicated module and what learnings I got from that. I've done it twice now, so it changed quite a bit in the second iteration. I'm then going to hand over to, while I give feedback from the first iteration with quotes, I'm going to let Aoife and Katie talk about their experience. Then I'm going to show or to demonstrate how I apply this as well in other modules that I'm involved in terms of teaching within college and indeed in external teaching. And then a couple of final thoughts and musings on my experience to date. So just to put things in perspective, we've all had a light bulb moment when we're talking about acquainting ourselves or really realizing the impact of our ecological footprint and the human being. So I was asked to develop about back in 2019 a global public health module. And it was when I was researching this, it was actually in the context of universal healthcare that I came across a paper and I said, in trying to broaden access to medicines and healthcare, that we could be actually causing a detrimental effect in terms of climate change and environmental impact. So I brought it in just as a kind of a standalone topic, not embedded with the behavioural risks and social determinants of health as we normally would in global public health. So it's just stood there for a couple of years, and I used to deliver about an hour in it and a little bit of sustainable solutions. However, then I really brought it in 2022-23 when I actually asked the continuous assessment, which represented 50% of this module at that time, so a long essay on the impact of medicines and healthcare and sustainable strategies to mitigate against it. So, and then I also included it as part of the summative assessment. And then I was asked in 2023 to develop a standalone module, an optional module. This was a newly designed MPharm program that we were implementing. So I did that with a very short space of time to do so. But then I continued to adapt the material for global public health. And also then I started to do some external teaching because as a hospital pharmacist, I know quite a lot of the pharmacists around the place. So I kind of ran around as many places as I possibly could. So we are now in 2020, the academic year of 2024-2025. We've just been through another iteration, which ended in December, of the module that Katie and Aoife were part of. And again, I've modified the content for the global public health, and I've included very much pillars of the sustainable healthcare in that content as well. And I'll show you what I've done with regard to continuous assessment and focus on that later on in the presentation, and also doing more external teaching as time goes on. So that's what my timelines per se. So in preparation for a dedicated module, it was to be run over 9 weeks, 5 ECT, optional module. And of course, everything starts with educating yourself, which I did. And it was a deep immersion, a literature review, on curricular content, but also in the topics that one would bring into this type of a module. So I attended training courses, webinars, conferences, whatever I could, to actually really, really broaden my perspective on the topic, because I was very committed to doing something that would make a difference in terms of the practice of pharmacy and indeed in those that I live with and communicate with and I'm friends with as well. I believe that the planetary health Planetary Boundaries by Richardson et al. Really kind of encompasses the focus for what are the impacts of the Anthropocene on planetary health. So I use this in all my teaching. And I like the way that it, brings in novel entities, and it's the burning embers approach that they use. And I really think it focuses anybody who actually is learning something new about planetary health. And of course, then that there are multiple effects of climate change. And indeed, I always emphasize plastic use as well, novel entities, and how that affects health. And one of the things that I really bring out in the teaching that I hope is the inequalities and inequities that abound in this whole impact on planetary health, because it's those that are most affected that are least responsible for causing damage. In terms of healthcare, then, of course, we have Healthcare Without Harm, multiple references. And of course, we have the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. And then in terms of medicines, I actually did a deep dive as well into various papers and material that would be of use. So in terms of building the curriculum content, there was a learning outcomes that had been developed by the Royal College of Surgeons in collaboration with the Irish Doctors for the Environment. So you can see the learning outcomes here: adaptation, political and public engagement, and of course the AME consensus guidelines by Shaw et al. And you can see here that there's a large circle of the planet in this paper when you read it, but I just brought out these two aspects of it here: knowledge and values. And I feel that in the early days of this iteration that I was focusing more of knowledge rather than on the values. And I'll come back to that. Of course, there were many different curricular content and papers that I looked to see how best to deliver the module. So this is what I came up with the first iteration. Lots of, define, describe, identify, etc., etc. And in my module aims, I had to provide students with an in-depth understanding of planetary health, the science of climate change, and how climatic change impacts on human health, and then the whole role of healthcare and medicines. And I brought about this concept of eco-literacy to that when I was writing this descriptor, which was finalised in late August for commencement just a couple of weeks later in September of that year. I ask a rhetorical question here for those of you present tonight. What do you notice about these learning outcomes? And we'll come back to that later. So several months later, I was preparing a talk for the AME conference that was actually held last August. And while when I thought about it, what my aims were in the original descriptor of the actual module, I realised that it was more than that I was trying to do. I was trying to equip future healthcare professionals with knowledge and skills to become advocates for change, and to be advocates for the adoption of climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies within healthcare systems that they would work in the future. So I everything starts changing and evolving. So that was really consolidated, having gone through the first iteration. From the point of view of the choice of teaching, I was clear from the start that we're moving away from what my normal clinical teaching is in terms of very much didactic. I recognise the need for the essential need for interactive casework. And I knew that I would have to hear the student voice and let their characters come through in the interactions that we would have. And their characters, as they work together in collaboration or learned together, was important. So I really did appreciate the difference between clinical teaching, which I do a lot of, and scientific teaching on this topic. Yes, knowledge acquisition was required, but I feel much more than that. And what I ponder, and I still ponder to this day, is what makes certain individuals change in response to acquiring knowledge and others not, to make real changes rather than just knowing about the topic. So this was the timetable of the first iteration. I don't really need to go into this in too much detail, but you can see there were 9 full weeks. We had, so the first was kind of setting the scene, then there was a lot about health impacts, and then how to mitigate in a broad sense before turning to healthcare and medicines in the latter part of the 9-week period. We did have a field trip, which I always knew I'd have to do to have something immersing in nature. So we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So I also knew that the didactic teaching would have to be consolidated with, as I said, in-class interactive activities. So looking at videos, obviously seeing David Attenborough, should I say, exploring interactive tools such as air quality indices, hunger maps, conflict zones. We went through a lot of these and I also have a lot of international students, so I wanted to make it context specific to where they would be going back to practice as pharmacists. We also, of course, incorporated case studies, both clinical at the same time that this module, the students were undertaking their respiratory module. So I borrowed cases from that and applied mitigation strategies with those. And also, of course, we did adaptation clinical cases in terms of heat-sensitive diseases, respiratory diseases, etc. And then student presentations, they were both individual in terms of the impacts you see here, the environmental impacts of cosmetics, entertainment, things that they would encounter every day of their lives. And also then later on in the module, there was group work looking at specific topics relating to healthcare or medicines use, as you can see here. And also I had the opportunity to have guest lecturers come. And these were Dr. Gemma O'Connor was member of the staff at the time, and she was very, very interested in sustainable textiles. Another member of staff is Dr. Matthew Lynch, who actually is from a farming background, so he brought his perspective. And of course, the college itself is very committed to greening practices and buildings, etc., etc. So John O'Brien from the laboratories came and spoke about the achievements that have been done within the college itself in terms of green labs and in our outreach campuses of Beaumont Hospital and Blanchardstown as well. So there was a diversity of learnings and teachings and topics, etc., etc. How to assess this? Optional modules at this time in RCSI in this program are pass-fail. I knew I didn't want to do an exam that would, not fit the type for this type of a topic, not an essay. I wanted something more and something need for a reflection, and I did explore a lot of options. So in the end, I did decide on an evidence portfolio of the activities that students had encountered, the didactic teaching, the directed learning, and also a reflective component to those tasks. So the offsite activity, I was very clear where this was going to be. I was born and reared very close to the National Botanic Gardens here in Dublin. So I've been many, many times, and it was lovely to bring the students there, and they really, really, really enjoyed it. And we were there for a number of hours, and we had a talk, a guided tour, exploring medicinal herbs, but also biodiversity. And then, of course, there was the many, many different plants from many parts of the world. And also having students from other parts of the world who hadn't had that experience, one of them described this as being absolutely magical. Lots of feedback in this. I don't want to focus on it too. I won't go through it all. But you can see here the type of things that, eye-opening was a word that was used consistently by the students. The fact that they could now communicate with others was another factor. They felt that it was transformative for them. And they also realised that there was a shared responsibility and that they needed to do that, not only in their daily lives, but also in their future practice. From my point of view, what learnings did I have? Well, I felt that there was an awful lot of teaching, an awful lot of didactic material. And especially by week 3, when I was still talking about the negative impacts of the planetary insults, if we could call it that, I remember thinking, and looking at the faces of the students and thinking, this isn't working. It's almost like too much for them. And it actually was almost too much for me. So it really brought to mind how important or how at times difficult it is to communicate on the impacts of the Anthropocene on planetary health. However, the nature interaction really, really worked. We walked for hours. We actually walked miles back to the tram goes right back to the RCSI. And that was lovely to have that engagement, not only with me, but also with each other as well. The assessment was okay, but I did recognise the limitations of it. And I really felt that there needed to be something more impactful or action outcome based to mobilise the students and to indeed empower them to be communicators, teachers, or in this day and age, influencers. So I changed it. So you can see very clearly here that I really went straight to, I wanted to become more straight to solutions rather than consistently talking about the health impacts. And by week 3, and even before that, we started talking about mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies as well. So everything was moved up a bit. And then I had more time to incorporate more sustainable healthcare issues in terms of the impacts of healthcare and more practical approaches to it. I'll show you that in a moment. I also had the ability to ask a trainee surgeon to come and present to the students. And my own PhD student who's a qualified community pharmacist, and their perspectives. Maybe the students might talk about that in a moment. So it did really, talk about many things to do with that. And I also introduced the topic of green chemistry, which Sally Freeman had highlighted, and she'd circulated her lecture. So I was able to adapt that and actually provide it to the students. And then in the last session, we really talked about their experience of communicating with others. And that was a two-way process as well, to find out, anecdotes of how they had, what they had thought, but how they actually related it to their friends, to their families, and those they met. So a little bit different in terms of the class-based and directed activities. More testimonials from the testimonials. I use those as cases to hear the voices of those most affected by planetary health insults, or the triple planetary crisis. Short report reviews. They watched, some of them elected to watch this, which I think is a beautiful programme on nature, the Oak Tree, Nature's Greatest Survivor by George McGibbon. And then also the fact that I enhanced the sustainable healthcare content as well. So we looked at mapping carbon and environmental footprints of healthcare interactions. And we did a whole workshop on that using, post-its and everything like that, as is normally done. So for 3 different scenarios: GP patient interaction, patient pharmacist interaction, and day case hospital interaction, looking to see where the carbon footprint or the environmental footprint was incurred, so that opened the way to show them where we could reduce those ecological footprints. And then taking from the CSH SUSQI formula, and that to apply that. And we used 2 papers from the BMJ Sustainable Practice, Lim's paper on why learning how to swallow pills is good for patients, parents, and the planet, and also Mina's one on prescribing oral over intravenous medications. So it was more detailed, more involved. I think that was what I was hoping for in that iteration. And of course, the students shone again in their presentations. And I think this is really consolidated for me, that they were using visual representations far more than I was. More, it was more like, you can see here, cosmetics, guess the carbon footprint of food. You can really see that they thought a lot, and they liked that, I suppose, escape to a certain extent from the actual writing essays and writing up lab reports and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of gave them a little bit of freedom. Well, I hope so. So I did persist with the evidence portfolio in the second iteration, I have to say, but I did include one thing for the planet to be done over the 9 weeks. So there was such a variety of things. Of course, fast fashion featured there, reducing insofar as possible the use of reusable cups or plastic bottles. These are some photographs from their portfolios, and this is a pair of shoes that somebody bought made from recycled plastics. Somebody did a beach clean. So there was action type things involved as well. So that activity based concept of doing something was I really tried to embed it. And of course, the students themselves prettified my portfolio far nicer than I could ever do it, with lovely graphics as well. So the field trip we went off to the Botanic Gardens again, a different guide this time. So that worked very, very well as well. I just point out to you here on the left-hand side, of course, that's an Irish yew tree there, which is completely poisonous. But in the background, which are normally the yews, as you know, are in cemeteries. That's to detract farmers from letting the animals graze on them many moons ago. But in the background, you see a round tower. That's actually Daniel O'Connell's round tower in Glasnevin Cemetery, which is just over the hedge of the Botanic Gardens in Glasnevin. You can see the typical Irish garden here, which we were brought on a wonderful tour of. And then we had coffee and scones thereafter. So I'm going to hand over now to the students who are going to talk about their input into this, or what their feedback is. Over to you, Katie and Aoife.
Thank you so much, Aisling, for handing us over. Give us a nice introduction. So I suppose we'll start. I'm Aoife.
I'm Katie.
And we're in second year in pharmacy here in RCSI in Ireland. And I suppose we're really grateful for this opportunity just to come on and I suppose share our own experiences with the planetary health module. and what we've kind of learned from it and taken from it.
Like kind of key takeaways or the impact it had on us more so, and how we've learned to kind of bring that with us. Our initial like the reason we gravitated towards it was Aisling.
100%. I remember going into that and saying to Katie, honestly, I have no preference with what module, with the choice module. I was kind of like, I'm not really sure what to be doing. And I suppose it was really Aisling that kind of, like, I think a lot of people said that as well in the opening talk. She was just so passionate about the topic, so encouraging, and her method of teaching, like, it really opened our eyes and I suppose enlightened us into like the small things that we can do. I always kind of thought environmental and sustainability was a very kind of taboo topic, which was spoken about a lot, but there wasn't a lot of, I suppose, education, things that we might be able to do to help, especially in regards to pharmacy. Obviously we have a huge interest in pharmacy and things like that where we're here.
We have to.
Yeah. But even just like the little things that you can do in pharmacy practice, that I think we never realized. Well, I personally never realized anyway.
We kind of, I think we both agreed that we, a lot of aspects of climate change and they're kind of buzzwords, and it all seems very far-fetched. And even Aisling mentioned earlier, like David Attenborough, I feel like even in the media the approach has always been like showing like ice caps melting, polar bears, things like that. But as Aisling mentioned, her delivery really was the kind of impact that we have on a day-to-day. And that's when it will actually impact you enough that you'll make changes, because you can see the difference that your day-to-day activities and your actions can impact our planetary health in the long term.
Definitely,
and I think that's why we have taken so much away from it, because we saw the physical, like even in terms of like fashion, things like that, the impact that like fast fashion has, and they're all things that are on our doorstep. And that applies to everyone our age even, and I think that's the difference, and that's why we
got such an impact.
We learned so much of it from it, because as even Ashley mentioned, her delivery was really on solutions, and that was the best approach and the best way to address it, because then we could see what we could do.
I suppose I will bring back to pharmacy again. Just like that, as Katie was saying, how like the little things can really make a difference. I suppose even like I personally kind of have brought that back to the pharmacy that I work in, and I suppose shared my education just as Aisling kindly shared it to us and kind of opened our eyes. And like the changes even that I've seen in my pharmacy, I think Katie can say the same, and a few other pupils that were in the class as well. Like that's 5 or 6 pharmacies who've made a conscious effort to make a decision. And like we feel like obviously it's a choice module at the moment, but if it was to be integrated into the program, like I suppose full time, like the impact that would have on like educating future healthcare professionals and future pharmacists, that we can then go in our training and like implement and make an impact, and try to anyway,
and if we're
encourage.
Sorry to cut off. If the way we're equipped with that knowledge and the awareness now, like Aisling always referred to it as, it's kind of glasses that you put on and suddenly you see things that you can't unsee. And if we're equipped with that knowledge, we can equip patients and the public. So it definitely should be.
I feel like we have a responsibility now that we've literally put on the rose-colored glasses. We kind of have a responsibility now to take action and go to our pharmacies, and like little things, for example, that Aisling kind of taught us, the like trying to choose tablets over liquid formulations where possible. Obviously it's not always possible, but even like say the amount of plastic that saves, choosing Salamol inhalers instead of Ventolin where possible, where their stock is available, and like appropriate recycling. I know a big thing that kind of a lot of pharmacy, like Boots pharmacies, have brought in is the e-retrieval. So like minimizing paperwork and things like that. I'm really, really grateful to Aisling for kind of giving me that opportunity to experience that, so thank you, Aisling.
Green goggles,
if we kind of haven't said it before. Like I'm really happy that we could make that effort. And I suppose just to highlight the point that like what we were a group of 10 students, like if that was brought into the 69 students in our class, like that it could really change the future of the planet. And I think that's kind of I feel proud that
Yeah.
we're kind of very aware of that now.
Definitely. And like that, if we're even the change that we've seen, or the change that we've kind of tried to bring about, and just that's us, the transfer of knowledge from Aisling. If there was more Aislings, we would definitely be better. But if we can, the way we brought that into our daily life and our practice, if that was more, you know, universal, even just as Aisling said one time, if we were able to enlighten patients on the difference that the tablets could make versus liquid where possible, you know, you're transferring that knowledge, you're sharing it, and ultimately that's the only way we'll ever see change, unfortunately, because it's once you're equipped like that, there it's the green lens or the green goggles,
You have a responsibility.
you have a responsibility. And no, unfortunately we live in a society where it is probably more difficult to limit your carbon footprint and be conscious and be more environmentally conscious. You know, it is hard because we live in a society where plastic is so accessible. But if more people were aware of this, it would probably be easier, and there'd be more mitigation strategies. And
I suppose more creativity and
yeah,
ideas,
you know,
and
if
you know,
you kind of put two heads together, you know, so ultimately that's what, like, we're not perfect. I know I'm not, but now we know that
we're conscious,
and we feel it on our conscience when we do things or we're a part of things that, you know, aren't environmentally safe or beneficial. So that's ultimately why. And the delivery of the module is definitely the best takeaway.
I think, again, leading back to Aisling, I think just your passion and like encouragement, and it wasn't like, as you said, it wasn't like sitting us down and telling us like this is what you need to do, like it wasn't in any way pushed on us. It was more as if it was like, it was inspiring, like it was trying to inspire us, I think. And I think that's something that's not, as Katie said, we need more Aislings. I suppose I think that's like quite a gift, like not a lot of teachers have that. Yeah.
As you can tell, we have very little in our slides, and that's we appreciate that, because one of our biggest peeves is when people just read slides. And that's the reason we gravitated to Aisling initially, is that she just had a great
gift
delivery mechanism. I don't know how. But it just,
okay, girls, this is not an Oscar, whatever it is. Listen, we didn't rehearse this. I would say to the audience here, I had no idea what they were going to say, and I think they're absolutely brilliant, and I'm glad that that's the way they feel about it. And I think it just demonstrates that, you know, messages can get across, and can get across effectively if you take the right approach. Would you say that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Lauren, I move. Is it okay if I move on now?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So, my learnings from the second iteration. I'm almost embarrassed now with all of that, but anyway, reduce the didactic teaching, more field trips, I think. Maybe a recycle centre, more focus on waste, more immersion in nature, sustainable cooking. It's probably not going to be done in this optional module, but perhaps across the curricula at large. Further students suggested did focus or ask about carbon calculator counting, and then provision of a list for students, and perhaps we could disseminate that across the student body as well. It was a very interesting feedback as well. Value of group conversations. We talked in the last day about communicating, and some people did say that they had negative experiences when they tried to communicate on it, and they probably would prefer, I suppose that meant that there are negative attitudes out there, and they need to have coping skills for that, no more than all of us do. So assessment did remain the same, and there was a call for more structure, so I am addressing that at the moment. So the other thing is that I used what I'd learned in this module and the development to apply it in my other teaching. So I've been teaching the Global Public Health module, as I said, for several years now, but I adapted the module content to bring in sustainable healthcare, more adaptation and mitigation cases added to what is communicable diseases, was a communicable disease tutorial, and then also brought a more innovative continuous assessment. We're all very aware now with AI the problems with it, that essays can be drawn from ChatGPT and stuff like that. So I really wanted something very innovative around self-care for the students, and I got it back in spades. And I'm just showing you a couple of examples here of the actual things. Now, I know this is a very busy slide. I want to show a couple of things. First of all, the artwork that's involved in it, also the focus. This is Katie's one here, Kate's one on sea serenity about water, sea swimming over in the west of Ireland. This is from Kira, who said that her granddad and somebody else thought that their diabetes would not be controlled properly. So she adapted the 7 pillars of self-care. James has a real interest in gardening. So he has a quote here from The Secret Garden, so long as I know what's expected of me. But look at the graphics that's adapted from the 7 pillars of self-care. This is something that Pedram did up in BioRender. This is Emer, where she mapped all the social activities for her cohort of patients that she has worked with for many, many years in the west of Dublin. There was also about deprescribing PPIs. There was digital health for students around exam time. But also, look, the ethnic backgrounds of the students were also explored. This is Sana's one here on Pranayush, which means translated to breath for longevity, applied to a COPD complex intervention. And then, of course, one of the students from Kuwait actually did talk about recycling tires rather than burning them with of course, the consequences of pollution. So huge scope. So I did something a little bit similar, but much smaller. That was an essay of 2,000 words with graphics for the year 4 students, but this is for the year 3 students. So I actually co-created this assessment with the students, forward and back, about 5, 6, 7 of them, giving their opinions. And I also included an international student because their ability to do an action-based activity in giving back or giving of time, volunteering perhaps, would not be amenable to them. So again, what I was trying to do was nudge them, fact and action together, okay? Options were to do or communicate, and it had to be just a visual representation and then a short reflection. So they're streaming in at the moment. The due date is actually tomorrow, but just to give you a taste of what it is here, Avina gave up meat for a week and then explored her Indian heritage at the same time with her mom, as she told me. This is single-use plastic. This is Chloe. She continues to donate blood and gave me the example of her dad. This is Kate here. Last Friday here in Ireland was Daffodil Day for hospice and cancer care collection, but there was also environmental ones. And this is about promoting health literacy and music. So it's this combination of the arts and practical and prevention and health. So everything kind of, bringing those streams together I recognize that they're really, really important. In my own teaching, I've infused it into it, such as, reducing the FeSO4 that was required for iron replacement therapy, and that was obviously published by the FIP recently. Prevention of headache through adopting lifestyle initiatives, MASLD and MASH in my liver lectures, prevention strategies for those, and then always at every opportunity to focus on optimization of medicines use in terms of compliance, but also reducing medicines use, deprescribing strategies, whatever it may be. And then, of course, in clinical audit, I introduced SysQI. I also am involved in health technology assessment, so I've incorporated that into that teaching. And as I've said, taught in hospital pharmacy departments. I have another 2 to do this month. I've educated our practitioners and through the Irish Institute of Pharmacy. I prefer really to go more toward workshop formats for my hospital interactions and my external teaching, which I hope to do over the next while. And I'm continuing to do research with our year 5 students and with our PhD student as well. Wondering how I'm doing for time. I have another 5 minutes perhaps, Nuala. So, okay. And since then, I've even done more work on looking at the piles here of educational curricula and how best to incorporate it into the undergraduate curriculum. So when I first started doing the teaching and developing the module, I probably wouldn't have been able to apply it or to use the planetary health education framework because I wasn't as informed as I should have been. But now if I look at that diagram, I can see so clearly at the very heart of it is interconnection with nature. And then everything on, like the rope, as they say, around this, the Anthropocene, movement building, that advocacy, maybe activism, but also systems thinking and complexity, and the absolute need for bringing in environmental justice, social justice, and striving for equity, and to get rid of these inequalities and inequities insofar as is possible. And if you look at ways to actually incorporate, things into the curriculum, this is Lomac Tompkins' paper just published late last year. It is so complicated. Like, do we have the time to do something like that? Of course, it's a brilliant piece of work on how to map, etc., etc., and then refinement, implementation, planning, all that kind of stuff. But it's very much like a complex intervention, and I'm not sure if we have time for that kind of in-depth, mapping and processing, etc., etc. So, and just recently, I came across this by Bena Morales and Froberg, and I'm just using this. I've come across an awful lot more, but this resonated with me in particular. And they quote, and these are directly from the paper: we need to move away from focus on fact-based teaching to one that promotes action. Knowledge alone is not sufficient to motivate sustained engagement in planetary health issues. Rather, education approaches that foster students' ability to perceive and adapt to changing environments or circumstances. And I think Katie and Aoife have really demonstrated that, and what they have got out of it, and to provide them with the opportunities to act. And I would agree with this statement. We believe that it is not necessary to teach updated content or spend more time on new teaching materials, but rather to readapt and orient the content that each teacher already teaches, but always with sustainability in mind. And I've just put, this is a comment from me, I tend to agree. People need, say that we need this big paradigm shift. I don't see that at all. If we look at our clinical teaching, we adapted the DOACs into, as anticoagulants. We wouldn't teach cancer now without the PD-1 inhibitors. We wouldn't teach type 2 inflammatory diseases without incorporating the JAK-STAT inhibitors, or the other plethora of pro-inflammatory agents that we're using now. We do it seamlessly and naturally. As new materials come online, as new medications, and new ways of treating things, we need to approach, I think anyway, planetary health, embedding it, infusing it in the curriculum, just as we do with new material for other clinical teaching. So the next iteration and beyond, I suppose, I feel transdisciplinary involvement and collaborations are going to be important. Bring the artists in, bring the arts as well, engineers, horticulturists, microbiologists, all together, looking at specific problems and, getting solutions to them, because we're so process orientated in healthcare. Everything goes like this, or in hospitals. We can be more ingenious and more innovative, as I think my students have demonstrated. So less fact-based teaching, more immersive experiences perhaps, a little bit of innovation in how to incorporate this in. And then from the assessment, in the next iteration, I'll be doing something along the lines of what has worked so well in the global public health modules at year 3 and at year 4. So overall, what we're trying to do is educate to change and to maintain new behaviours. And when I said I was going to come back to the AME consensus guidelines, what we're really trying to do is to instill values for transformative and lasting change. And if you look at it, harmony with nature, respect for human rights and dignity, equity and social justice, responsibility for ethical resource use, challenging inequity and misuse of power, and as ever, as healthcare professionals, a professional duty to protect health. So moving from that knowledge to the values space, I think, is really important. So finally, coming back to the beginning, I really do think that to teach is to learn twice. I have gained a lot from the experience, and I hope that the students have also. Teaching planetary health is best done by infusion, I think, into the curricula in some way, whatever way we can do it, and whatever any way that is innovative. And finally, for me, in deference to the students, that was not rehearsed. I didn't hear any of that before. The students have actually been wonderful teachers to me. So thank you. And Gurab Míle Maith is the Irish for thank you. All right.
Míle Maith, Aisling, and Katie and Aoife, thank you so very much for that amazing presentation and the passion with which it was delivered. So we have plenty of time now, everybody, for questions. There's lots of rounds of applause. So I think everybody's really appreciated your input. So thank you, everybody. Please feel free to either type a question in the chat, or if you have a question, just raise your hand and we have some time for discussion. While people are having a think, I'm going to start, if that's okay. Katie and Aoife, I'm going to come to you. So I was really interested to hear sort of how one individual, in this case, Aisling, really inspired you to change, which I think is really worth remembering when we're all out there kind of working really hard to do our little bit. That Aisling and I was talking earlier, that just inspiring one person to make a difference can be really significant. But Aoife, I think it was you said you went and shared with your pharmacy your sort of knowledge and awareness. And I was really interested to know, first of all, how was that received by the pharmacy team, and sort of what actual changes did they make as a result of that?
To be honest, when I first kind of had brought up the whole topic of sustainability, I think it was like kind of a shock to hear that coming from like a younger person, I suppose, which I don't know, is that a common thing or not? But I don't know, Katie, if you agree.
They were impressed.
But yeah, they were impressed, but they were also, I think, quite shocked that I kind of had that interest as well. So I kind of shared with them really little snippets of what I learned during the module, and like impacts, things like that, and how like in pharmacy, like what we can do to help. And I think they were even shocked. Like they also kind of weren't aware. So I think it was nice for me to be able to go and share that. I felt quite powerful, to be honest. And then like since then, like everything, like I feel like like as me and Katie were saying, I think not that they're like not that like much has changed, but it's the conscious, like everything's much more like consciously done, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I know recently they have put in the e-retrieval whole side of things, so it's a lot of like minimizes a lot of like paper and like plastics and that in the pharmacy. But also I think there is a lot of oversupply of medicines, especially in Ireland. We're giving out medicines without a need when patients don't use them, especially things like Salamol and Ventolin inhaler, where like inhalers where doctors will typically write like one for every month, where when the patient may not need that. So I think that is one thing that has definitely changed in my eyes anyway. I think we're much aware now and able to ask, well, that's kind of what I've seen in the pharmacy team, that they're kind of there and able to ask, like, do you need it this month, or like not just assume and kind of give something that is wasteful. So that kind of thing. But also just like, I suppose, like recycling and things like that kind of wasn't as properly emphasized on before I kind of brought it up to them. But I really, the point there I was trying to make was, I actually just found it powerful how like a group of 10 students could go and say that to their pharmacies, and like look how much of an impact that has made already. Like if that was a case of this was brought across the college and RCSI, like into hospitals, into community pharmacies, into other healthcare settings, I think there definitely like could be like a huge change for the positive in the future. So I think it is quite powerful to teach, as Aisling has kind of made the point of. But
no, that's great to hear, and great that you took that knowledge and put it into action, because that's the key thing, is to actually do something with it. So it's really good also that was received positively, and you've made that difference. Aisling, can I ask you, because you said it was an optional module, so what kind of was the uptake like, and did that change over the 2 years, and any thoughts on that?
Okay, so the class sizes are getting bigger. There's no doubt about that. So in the first module, the first iteration, there was about 13 students in that one. Actually, and in the second one, it's about 18 students, and we had one dropout as well. With regard to how it's divvied out, it's students give their preference, I think, in 1, 2, and 3, and then there's a lifestyle module, a chemistry module, and a microscope module and an education module. So they divide it up, and it's equally divided, and I think that's more or less how it's done.
Okay. And your total cohort size is what?
What did you say there, Aoife? 59?
Okay, just for context, so that's 20 out of about 59, 60. That's like a big percentage, actually.
But in the year 3s, then it's a bigger, I have quite a cohort, so that we've touched those and the year 4s, because I had to double teach global public health this year. So that you can see difference between the students as well, who've been out in placement, and they recognise, so they've had, the 4th years have had a placement, 3rd years hadn't. So I had to adapt a little bit for that. And you can see that coming through,
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody got any questions? I mean, I'm just going to keep asking questions if nobody else does. And do feel free to switch your cameras on now if you wish. And if you have any questions, just put your hand up or pop them in the chat.
Nuala, there's a question from Pavani in the chat about male female percentage enrolled onto the module. Wonder if there's anything we can do to offer further encouragement to male students to achieve a better balance going forward.
We had one lad in the first iteration, and we had one lad in the second iteration. But so yeah, it was, and the student at the first iteration was Canada and had a very insightful, gave his insights on what was happening in Canada. So that was very useful. And I find it really interesting, when I do assign the way we live, eat, work and play, with particular things, I often actually get it right. And I remember in the first iteration, I gave sport, and the impact of sport on the environment or sporting activities. And the student said to me, "How did you know I played sport?" And I didn't. So she plays really, really high level hockey. And then the last iteration, again, I randomly assigned it, and the two students, one of them was the guy and another girl, one plays basketball to a high level, another plays GAA, which we play an awful lot of in Ireland. And it was just completely random. So, and then they're looking at what, the kit and everything like that, the protein bars, like it was just really insightful from their point of view, and, to actually see that, explore it.
The Super Bowl. Yeah. I remember that. We didn't realise the impact that the Super Bowl had, how damaging it was, and the carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a thing that really came through it when this kind of really made a difference to you, is when you could apply it to things that you could see in your day-to-day life, and that's that sort of making it personal thing. Because I think Katie mentioned talking about polar bears and things that are happening far away, that means nothing to you, does it? So it's bringing it home.
Yeah, and that's when you realise, not only even just like relating it back, I remember like being taught how, where do we get our food and our water is land and sea. And if we have things like landfills or the way plastic ends up in water, ultimately we're going to consume that, the impact that would have on our health, everything like that. And when you can relate it to your day to day, because like the polar bears and stuff, like obviously it makes an impact on people and it's quite profound and nobody likes to see the harm, but it doesn't impact your day to day living. So you're not going to change your day to day living to help it. So the way it was related to us, and we were being offered day to day solutions, and
accessible,
and it was more accessible, and it seemed more achievable. And that was more rewarding as well for us to be able to implement into our living. It was just a totally different perspective than we'd ever seen. And even as you said, when we kind of shared that with some peers, even the girls that we live with, they even sat back and said, "Wow, like I never thought of it like that."
Yeah.
That was what was so unique about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think we have to not make assumptions, don't we, about what other people know or do not know about sustainability and what's possible, because I think there's sometimes a tendency for a little bit of ageism, I feel, in sustainability, where there's an assumption about, the young people are affected and they know all about it. And that's not necessarily always the case, nor is the reverse true. So I think we just have to be really open, and something called the curse of knowledge, I think, where you know it, you assume everybody else knows it, but they don't necessarily.
Totally. Yeah.
So Aisling, you kind of covered some kind of really great points in terms of your learning and moving from sort of the second year of the module from the first. Talking to people who are kind of starting out and maybe thinking about introducing sustainability into their pharmacy curriculum, as a lot of the schools in the UK will be doing. What are your sort of top tips in terms of where to get started for somebody who's maybe not done anything on this yet at all?
Okay, now I should have prepared an answer for that.
Sorry,
question,
I should have.
No. Okay, I think we have to do the science. You have to, because we're scientists, certainly. And I always thought that, because that's how it's greenhouse gas and anesthetic gases, it's chemistry, and to actually bring that's very much the planetary health, the chemistry, bring it to the sciences first. Just a nudge, just to put it in perspective. The health impacts, we should know, but start immediately then bringing in solutions. Like I would now next year, I don't even think I'll have that whole, the second session will be on solutions for health planetary impacts. It's going to move back and back. Allow the students, I would say that, you know, I had 17 or 16 or 17 students, didn't have them all every week now, mind you. But I think that having the conversations was really important. I haven't taught small group teaching since I ran an MSc in hospital pharmacy several years ago. But it was that opportunity to learn with them. And also, like, there can be ages in both ways, like, you know, that the gen, I don't know what generation you are now, Z or something like that, whatever, and that they don't care. They actually do care, and they will make a difference and want to make a difference. So maybe it's a little bit of interaction teaching. And what I'd really love to do, though, is say, for instance, if I had the opportunity to do a chemistry lab that in green chemistry rather than the didactic part, because I did chemistry for my PhD, and like, oh, when I think of the solvents I used and the chromatography, silica, oh my lord, you know, nowadays. So just to, if we could do one of that, and I have some connections with some chemists, and I would think that'd be a great thing to do, because I know these two girls love chemistry as well, so we've discussed this, and bringing that, and ironically enough, that would also reduce the carbon footprint of the chemistry labs that we are conducting. The same could be said about formulations, you know, in pharmaceutics and stuff. There's some, you know, the microarray needles and stuff, and, you know, showing things like that to the students and the ability, you know, and also perhaps the other thing would be the kids well, you know, that how to kids med, sorry, yes. Yeah. And I talked to that about, I gave a talk on Saturday to hospital pharmacy technicians, but talking about training, you know, children, but even training older adults. And perhaps, I suppose, the other thing that I would love to do, of course, this is all a wish list, would be to bring in patients with their medications. Mm-hmm. And actually, what you've said there, Aoife, earlier on, my PhD student on Saturday was doing a locum, and just by every contact counts, you know, that mantra, he was able to take prescriptions that were pre-prepared because the health mail comes in now. Do you need everything in the bag? And he just brought, you know, was able to take, you know, stuff out that was unnecessary. You know, every pill that is dispensed and is never used has a carbon and an ecological footprint. So there are wish lists from patients, but you can see that moving away from the didactic more, but you have to be so well up on your topic really before you can, you know, graduate towards that.
Yeah. And I was just also going to ask. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just also going to ask, and it's come up in the chat as well, about then your sort of colleagues and faculty. So Sonia's asked, was it easy to convince the Academy about the need to include this module in the curriculum? So I guess that, and also how do you engage your colleagues as well? Because you're very much the green champion, Aisling, and it's very clear that you are the one who's got the passion and the drive and is doing this over and above the day job. That's very, very clear. So how do you bring everybody else along?
Okay. That is okay. So I think when the optional module was, you know, I was asked to do it, it was more because they needed an optional module rather than the topic per se, but now it's embedded. So yes, I have discussed it with the head of the academic affairs, and you know, I have thoughts and around how it should be done. As to the faculty, I have given some talk. The approach is going to have to be a little bit different, I think. We've set up a part of our faculty page. There is a sustainability section now, so I have to start populating. I've just been mad teaching over the last 3 or 4 months, so I have not had it, but that's where my focus is going to be over the next few months. We have solutions to do it, and I just think it will be, yeah, it'll be time. We do have, you know, I've convinced some students, but I also obviously, or we as champions of any sort, have to actually educate the educators as well.
Yeah. Great. Plenty of work to keep doing then also. Okay, I'm conscious of time. Thank you so much to all three of you. It's been really insightful and really helpful for everybody to sort of share your experience, and it's so wonderful to see the enthusiasm and that sort of knowledge being taken out and being put into action in practice. So thank you so much to all of you. Just before we finish up, I'd just like to share a couple of slides just about our next event. So I'm going to go to this slide first. We have a joint event in a few weeks' time, and I've spelt it wrong. Look, it's 23rd of April, not April. A joint event with our respiratory network, and the link to that is in the chat. That's just a short lunchtime event on the new NICE asthma guidance relevant here in the UK. And then we're also having an event on the 18th of June, and this is about optimising deprescribing and structured medication reviews. And we'll have Dr. Nadja van Ginneken, who's a GP, and Charlotte Condamine, who's a pharmacist, both working in Central Liverpool PCN. And they've undertaken a piece of work around focusing on deprescribing within their structured medication reviews and how they were able to reduce polypharmacy and the sustainability impact of that. So that's our next pharmacy session. So if you've enjoyed this session, please do join our pharmacy network, and please do tell your kind of teams and colleagues and get them to join also. If you would like to present a topic, or if you can recommend for a speaker for a future event, please do let me know. We're always welcoming new speakers. So just left for me really then to say thank you very much everybody for this evening. Thank you for joining. We will be posting this on the CSH YouTube channel. It usually takes a week or two to appear on that. I'll post about that on the network and on LinkedIn when that's available. We'll be around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to sort of stay and ask any questions. But otherwise, please do enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Stop recording.